Hey, what's up guys? This is Kevin of 8 Virtues. This video actually doesn't have anything directly to do with Sylph or Sanctimonia, but a project I've taken up of late is to build an arcade cabinet. And, being a huge fan of the arcades from, being a child of the 80s and such, hanging out in the malls, having a lot of fun in the arcades. Not so much the early days, with Space Invaders and Galaga, Galaxy and all of those, and Centipede and such, but really more like Street Fighter 2 and that era, Samurai Spirits, Samurai Showdown. Huge fan of the arcade, so I cannot believe, being almost 40 years old now, that I haven't done this before. So, I just wanted to show off the control panel that I made, which obviously is a component of the arcade cabinet to be, and really talk about just a few things for other, if you're listening and you want, or you're considering building your own arcade cabinet, just a few things to think about based on my experiences, this being my first, very naive. So here it is, of course, the control panel. This is the top of it. You can see this button here is player 1 coin, obviously player 1 start, player 2 start, and player 2 coin. The button arrangement here, I found an excellent website that went through several configurations of buttons. They showed US standard buttons, Japanese standard buttons, a bunch of variations. I went into detail with precise measurements. It was immensely helpful. I will post a link to that in the description of the video. I chose these actually because they're fairly close together and they fairly closely represent the actual standard US button layouts, which are actually straight. Imagine these, but instead of having a curve to it, like an ergonomic keyboard, they're actually just 2 rows of perfectly straight buttons. This is a piece of, I believe, 3/4 of an inch MDF, which is it's essentially sawdust mixed with glue pressed together. It's very heavy. The actual cabinet itself, which I'll show you in a moment, I actually use 7/16 of an inch OSB, which is pretty atypical for an arcade cabinet. Normally people use MDF. I think they typically use 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch. I wanted to make mine lighter, so I didn't do that. Anyway, the surface here, you can see it's obviously not wood. You can see a little bit of a rise here, right there, where it's coming up a little bit. This is actually glued down and screwed in on the opposite side. This is actually cabinet liner I found at Walmart for very cheap. It was 20 inches by 8 feet. Black, probably about 1/8 of an inch thick cabinet liner, which I wrapped around this, glued it and screwed it from the back. And I'll show you the back right here. This is real quick. This is my television, my HTPC, and a very old computer case here with my stereo receiver on top of it. Anyway, let's flip this bad boy over here. It's actually hooked up and live right now. I've been testing the buttons and such. Give this a little flip so we can see the back side. I'll turn it around so the top is the top and the bottom is the bottom. This is where things get a little bit crazy. These are some corner braces here, which are actually going to attach this to the chassis. 2 on each side. They're kind of big, which is fine. This is, of course, the back of Joystick. These are the 6 buttons. Again, player 1, player 2, coin buttons. So you see I tried to stretch it out. It's a little bit loose on this side, tighter on this side. And in my opinion, especially so far and also in theory, it's actually better to coat or to skin, if you will, at least the control panel. Forget about the rest of the cabinet, but the control panel should be skinned in something soft. Something that has a little bit of give to it. It makes it more ergonomic when you're sitting the palm or the pad of your hands on it. If you think about it like a keyboard, you have a rest right here, right? It's generally soft. As you type, it's sort of the same theory when you're using the joystick or the buttons, that after a while your hand's actually going to start to feel just how hard the surface is underneath it. So I think this makes it much more comfortable. It actually looks better. You can see from the reflections it's slightly textured. Still relatively easy to clean because it's purely plastic. But I'll tell you what, I got these, this came as a kit actually. All these wires, these buttons, and the 2 joysticks came as a kit. The cabinet I actually designed myself using Blender actually. So, where are they? 4-Party Fun, interestingly in Pennsylvania, although $57.95 actually, so for 16 buttons and 2 game pads and all the wires and the actual controller chip right here. That's the USB cable connected to it that connects it to the computer. All the buttons, including the joysticks, of course, connect into these pinouts here, which are comparable to the if you ever build computers, the front of the computer case, the power button, reset button, the hard drive activity light, the power LED, it's exactly the same type of connectors. I'm not sure you can really see them there. Same type of connectors. Anyway, they connect to the buttons. It's extremely simple. The problem is that the manufacturing quality of not so much the buttons or the joysticks, but the actual wires was so poor. I actually had to hot glue them in place because they wanted to pull out. Also, the wires were actually too short. So again, if you get something for 4-Party Fun on eBay from Quakertown, Pennsylvania, for this particular price, they probably sell better kits. You really want to take that into consideration. 2-player USB MAME arcade kit with 2 joysticks, 4/8-way, which is actually 4-way. 16 HAP, maybe HAP is the company responsible for this fiasco. The buttons aren't that bad if HAP only did the buttons, but in any case, yeah, I actually had to glue them together. The wires were too short. I had to use some of the extra wires, actually cut them to use them for scrap wire, strip them and splice them together so they reach. The width of this control panel is actually 2.5 feet, which I figured was pretty good for 2 players, 2 people playing Street Fighter 2, where they wouldn't get into an actual fight because they were too close to each other, when the rage started of someone getting defeated. So that was a bit of a challenge. Something else that was a challenge, if you look here, if you actually look at these pieces of metal here, see how they're slightly bent? I did that because they didn't work when they were straight. The reason why is, this being an actual 4-way, not an 8-way, if you need to move diagonally, where it's, for example, using both of these at the same time, in theory, with a 360-degree radius, if you divide that by 8, you get 45-degree increments. 45, 45, 45, 45, etc. Well, it was actually about a 2-degree radius for the diagonals. So I actually had to bend these pieces of metal such that the diagonals were much larger than 2 degrees and much closer to 45 degrees, which was incredibly tedious. I just had to keep, bending it, checking it, rolling the stick around, listening for the clicks, watching when it hit this one, when it hit that one, when it had both of them, when it escaped from both of them and went to just straight up, so on and so forth. That was something special. So I highly recommend getting a true 8-way directional joystick. I don't even know what one looks like. I'm assuming they exist. Rather than having to go through the tweak fest of dealing with this sort of thing. And of course, I did the same thing over here. Actually, I've played Street Fighter 2, testing both of these, and it works incredibly well with these slight adjustments that I've made to it. It has a very nice 45-degree zone, since slightly bending them like that. And if you're going to do this yourself, the one thing you don't want to do not overbend them. If you do that, you'll actually push straight, and it will hit the side one because it's bent too far. And that's even a worse nightmare. But in any case, this is working extremely well now. I'm terribly proud of it. I actually cannot wait to put this into the cabinet. Right now I'm actually using these corner braces to keep it upright. Flip it around again. So I can play right here in front of my TV. See? It lifts it up quite nicely. So what I'm going to do now, as opposed to showing show you me playing Street Fighter, which would be kind of boring, I'm going to go ahead and show you the work I've done so far in my cabinet. Okay, the adventure resumes as I descend into the dungeon. This is my makeshift work area here. So you can see it's a massive stack of OSB, of course 7/16 of an inch. All my tools got this recently. This is invaluable, by the way, if you are skinning anything. And by that I mean actually covering something in skin, not removing it. Although I suppose it could be used for, you know, either one. No, actually while we're over here, these are actual schematics that I printed out from Blender and edited in the GIMP. That's the side view, of course, of the cabinet with some measurements. And this actually is a more detailed side view showing the exact dimensions of the piece of wood and how they're supposed to be lined up. You know, that actually reminds me, as I show you the cabinet here, that there's a lot of plans online, actually. This, of course, is only partially assembled. I do have the rest of the pieces cut out, but there's a lot of plans online, and I don't necessarily recommend using them straight away. I think you really need to sort of visualize it on your own and make sure everything lines up. This includes arcade cabinet models that were made in Blender for purely rendering purposes, which may not be accurate. For example, this line here, which is actually where the control panel is going to rest. The front edge of the control panel is going to rest right here and follow up basically along here, so it's the distance between this lip and the top of the control panel is equal here as it is to here. This is, I believe it's about, is it 38 inches? I could be wrong about that, don't take my word for it, but the point is you actually need to measure this and feel it yourself by putting your hands here and seeing if that feels right. So I actually measured this height myself based on what would feel comfortable to me for putting my hands on an actual control panel in an arcade. The distances that were used in the schematics I found online did not match that. In some cases they did, which was reassuring, but often they did not. So I would be extremely wary of online plans as far as the dimensions of your cabinet. So again, this is 7/16 of an inch OSB. Because it is OSB, you can't paint this. This entire thing will have to be skinned, basically covered in some sort of surface. This, of course, is the front control panel. The bezel actually will start here and go up to here. There is a top component. Of course, this is the marquee from basically here to here. The marquee will go across here to this side. You can actually mount a light in here. It could even be something as ridiculous as a like a desk lamp, or a bare bulb. You can mount that here to illuminate it. You can see I have essentially 2x4 segments to hold it together. It's ridiculously simple. You would think that it'd be something terribly eloquent and fantastical, but it really isn't. It's 2x4's OSB. As long as you have the capability to skin it, it will look amazing. So is the back portion. Of course, I'm missing the actual back here. This is where the computer would go. I'm actually going to have the back's actually going to swing out on hinges, so you can access the computer and all the internals in order to fix something if it breaks, or to take the computer out, etc., swap it out, what have you. Anything that needs to be done, any sort of maintenance, of course, can be done. As far as the seams here, the actual joints between the pieces, I'm going to fill that in with caulk, and I'm going to have a sound system with 4 speakers. It's still going to be stereo audio, but there's going to be 2 speakers, of course, mounted across here, this panel here, which isn't up yet, so you get the sound directly. If you're familiar with arcade games at all, you know the sound's often very treble. The FM synthesis, it's more like a ad-lib, music synthesizer card. It's very crispy. So I'm also going to have, powered off the same amp, 2 speakers actually inside here. And so sealing it up with caulk completely, all the way around, is going to be important, because there'll essentially be holes to where the sound generated by the internal speakers, this will act as an amplification chamber, much as a guitar or a violin or any other stringed instrument, where it'll sound much warmer, much softer, much more muted. So you'll simultaneously get the crispiness of the direct feed from the speakers here, and the sort of muffled, bassier, more warmer mid-tone sound of the speakers inside the cabinet actually coming out through the holes. So I hope that'll actually create a much richer sound experience and much less ear-piercing and annoying musical and sound experience than your typical arcade machine. Because I am using OSB. If you're not familiar with that, it is essentially wood chips pressed together with glue. You can see them here. This is not a surface suitable just for painting. If you want to put stucco on it or something, that would be interesting, but it really needs some sort of facade or some sort of covering, because it will peel away if you continually apply friction to it. So the limitation of using the lighter 7/16 inch OSB is that you do in fact need to cover this entire unit, each panel, with some sort of skin. So I'm going to actually go to the hardware store and look into some different options, whether it's linoleum, tile, basically linoleum 4x8 sheets that I can wrap and cut around it. I may go to, I'm sure you call it, not a hobby store, like a fabric store, to try to find some faux leather, something like that, that I can coat it in, and hopefully non-porous and also non-textured, because if you do, especially the sides here, if you can cover that with something non-textured that's essentially flat and non-porous, then you'd be able to apply decals to it. So you could take this to a signed printing shop, give them the dimensions, or perhaps give them the artwork in advance that you've edited so it's actually covering the correct area so it fits within this panel, and give them the dimensions, have them print it out, and you could apply that yourself or have them apply it to it, so you could have some nice artwork on the unit. Alternatively, once you have the skin on it, of course, you could just paint it if you wanted a solid color. So this is what I have so far. I do, as I showed you earlier, have a control panel. I do have the top piece that will go across here. I'm saving the piece, the marquee piece here, to be fabricated at a sign shop, so I can get some translucent, actual printed artwork panel that the light will shine through. The underside here, I do have, the one thing I haven't fully cut out yet is the bezel, which will contain the monitor. I do have it shaped, but I haven't cut out the actual center part where the monitor will attach. Although that will be coming shortly. So this is pretty much it. As you can see, very simple, not much to it. It's got a lot of detail work left to do to make it presentable. But that's pretty much it, really. There's nothing truly glorious about an arcade cabinet's actual construction. It's a lot of hard work. It's certainly very tedious, You need to be precise with your measurements. One thing I will advise is that when you're doing both sides, the left and the right side, they were both cut out of a single 4x8 foot piece of OSB. So in order to get those perfectly the same size, step back a bit, what you need to do is cut the piece of OSB lengthwise straight down the middle. So you have 2 feet and 2 feet with the cut in the middle. Take those two sides, put them on top of each other, map your angles however you want to do it. Take vice grips, big vice grips like these, right here, clamp the 2 foot by 8 foot pieces of wood together, and use a jigsaw to cut them out. That way you get 2 identical pieces. So this unit here, that is exactly 2 feet. And of course the width, as I described earlier, with the control panel, is 2.5 feet, or 2 feet 6 inches. And interestingly, a lot of arcade planes are actually larger than that online, which I truly do not understand. Because, despite wanting to be authentic, this is more than adequate. So, I look forward to having another post showing the progress of this machine. And I really cannot wait until it's up and working.